When it comes to iconic characters in pop culture, we think you'll agree when we say that The Mask belongs on that list. Who could forget Jim Carrey's iconic performance in the 1994 movie as the titular Mask? He was extremely funny and silly in that movie, and in the less popular sequel film, The Son of the Mask, the behavior continued. But would you be surprised if we told you that things actually aren't the same in the comics? The comic book version of The Mask and the movie version of The Mask are vastly different. Allow me to elaborate. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, though, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The concept of the mask. Who came up with it? The credit for the creation of the mask has to go to Mike Richardson. He came up with the concept back in the early 1980s. He wanted to create an anti-hero who was eccentric and straight up bizarre, someone who would be a mix of the Creeper and the Joker. However, it took Mike until 1985 to finally create the first sketch of the mask. The first sketch was published in APA 5, the amateur press publication. It was created by Mark Verheiden. Then, in 1986, Mike Richardson founded Dark Horse Comics. He pitched the idea to Mark Badger, who was a writer and artist working with Dark Horse, and he was in. Mark Badger and Mike Richardson came up with a strip known as The Mask in the Dark Horse Presents series, which is basically like the beta version of The Mask. It ran for 21 issues and ended because the concept was getting too complex and there was a huge problem with meeting deadlines. Then, in 1989, The Mask was relaunched again as a part of Mayhem, another Dark Horse series. Chris Warner was the artist in charge, and he brought the original sketches that Mike Richardson had come up with back in the day into the picture, along with John Arcudi as the writer and Doug Mahnke as the artist. Together, they came up with the mask that we know today, basically by mixing Tex Avery's crazy cartoons and the Terminator's destructive force. The stories Arcudi and Mahnke published in Mayhem later came to be known as the 0th issue of The Mask. The Mayhem series ended after just 4 issues, and in 1991, Arcudi and Mahnke joined hands to continue the Mask's story for 4 more issues. The original duo stayed with the Mask until 1995, when the Mask Strikes Back series was released. Then, in the 90s, we had several crossovers, and the last issue of The Mask that we saw was in 2000, with a crossover between Joker and Batman, resulting in an issue of 142 issues for The Mask. Origin of the Mask. How did the artifact come to be? In the comics, we don't get to know anything about the creation of the mask with certainty. The only thing we do know is that once upon a time, Lord knows when, an unknown tribe in Africa created the mysterious mask using their ancient knowledge. They crafted the mask out of jade and infused it with magical powers that they would use for their rituals. When the mask is worn, the wearer gets cartoon-like powers that allow them to change reality completely, practically making them unstoppable, allowing them to pull random stuff from thin air, shapeshift themselves, and lots of other cool stuff. However, all of this cool stuff doesn't come without a price. On wearing the mask, the wearer effectively gives up their morality and conscience. They are much more prone to leaning into their darker thoughts and might even do horrible things like murder or unjust vengeance. However, things are a little different in the 1994 film. In the movie, Stanley finds the mask and he eventually goes to Dr. Arthur Newman, the handy-dandy mask expert, to learn more about it. In their meeting, Dr. Newman told him that the mask was probably from 4th or 5th century Scandinavia. According to him, the mask was created to depict Loki, a trickster Norse god. Now, Newman specifically chose Loki because, as you would know, he was banished from Valhalla because he caused a little bit too much trouble. This led to Stanley hypothesizing that perhaps the mask was banished with Loki and that it was brought to Earth. Now, according to the other movies with the mask, it is mentioned that it was created by Loki himself so that he could cause more chaos on Earth. In case you didn't know, the 1994 movie actually has a deleted scene. There, we see a group of Vikings arriving at a place they refer to as the end of the world. The date is roughly around the 10th century. We see the Vikings bury the mask in the ground and a witch prays over it for the sake of the next fool who might find it. We're kinda glad that scene wasn't included in the movie. We like that the movie gives us a sort of open-ended answer to the question instead of confirming anything. It means we can interpret the origin of the mask in whichever way we want to. Critical breakdown of all creation theories behind the mask. Now, because of the deleted scene and Dr. Newman's words, a lot of people believe that Loki was the one who created the mask. It is assumed that Loki specifically created it so that he could use it to cause suffering amongst the peoples of Earth, who are considered to be Odin's mask. The second film, Son of the Mask, actually confirms this theory, and we see Loki show up and admit to his daddy issues. However, a lot of fans find it hard to believe that Loki would actually do such a thing. If you've seen the second movie, and we're sorry if you have, you would know that the mask holder has more power than Loki himself. Why would any god, let alone the god of mischief, allow a mere mortal to have more power than him? Another theory that people believe is that the magical property of the mask is none other than Loki himself. It's assumed that Odin put Loki in the mask as a banishment, and Loki ends up possessing whoever wears the mask, giving them the Loki power in a way. However, this theory has issues as well. Like, if it's Loki who's possessing everyone, then why would the host have a unique identity? Psychologically speaking, you could say that the mask brings out the id of the host's psyche, and if that's the case, then why is Loki not able to be in full control? Does that mean that because he's banished, he doesn't have the full abilities he would usually have? Is that why whenever someone wears the mask, the result is that we get kind of a mix of both Loki and the host's id? Either way, even if the mask is controlled by Loki or created by him, the mask is nothing more than a representation of him. The confirming fact about this is that the iron nose we see on the mask has a symbol. That symbol is the inverted Nordic lagu, or the letter L. If you go through the actual Norse mythology in the hopes of finding your answers, sadly, you're not going to find anything. There is no such event mentioned in Norse mythology stating that Loki created a mask or had the power to control anyone other than himself. That is why we can say there's no connection between the creation of the mask and actual Norse mythology. And how did the Norse mythology connection get made in the first place? Well, I believe it happened because of the association of the mask with Loki based on the way it looks. However, that said, if you were to look at the animated series, you'd find another story with a different origin. In the animated series, it was said that the mask was created around the 11th century somewhere in Nordic Europe. However, this was hogwash that Dr. Pretorius made up to capture Stanley. In another episode, titled Shadow of a Skillet, we meet a villain named Skillet. He's over 4,000 years old and knows every host of the mask. He claims that both Abraham Lincoln and Attila the Hun wore the mask. Using that information, we can deduce that the mask was created around the 5th century, as Attila was born around 406 AD. This could mean that at least this version of the mask is connected with Loki after all. What does the mask look like? Now, we all know the old Viking-type mask we saw in the movie. It's made out of wood, and given its so-called Scandinavian origins, it looks like an ancient concave triangle made of wood. It has several distorted vertical bands and cracks in the wood around it. It has a dark green color on the surface and 3 holes for the eyes and mouth. There's a piece of metal between the 2 holes for the eyes that stops right above the hole for the mouth. This could be bronze or rusty metal. It has 4 metal points stamped on it, and the 5th has the letter L stamped on it. However, in the animated series or the comics, we don't see the same design. In fact, in the original comic, the mask design had heavy tribal designs present on it. The mask was completely oval in shape, and it was big enough to cover the entire face of the wearer, starting from the top of the head and ending at the chin. There were 2 large white spots for the eyes with red pupils and a very prominent nose. In fact, this mask even had lips carved out on it. Now, no one knows what material this mask was made of, but from what we can see, it looks as though it's made up of a series of jagged pieces all coming together despite so many cracks. As you may have guessed, the animated series also created a new mask design from scratch. This particular mask was a combination of both the designs we've mentioned so far. However, you can see that this mask leans more towards the movie mask design and not the original. It had a more oval shape and 3 strips on it. It was made of wood and painted a light brown color. It seemed to be made of oak, but it still had 3 holes, similar to the one we see in the movie, and it had a piece of metal between the nose and the eyes. The edges of the mask, along with the holes for the mouth and eyes, are painted green. The transformation of the mask. Now, we have 3 different versions of the mask, and it makes complete sense if you're wondering if each of them operates in a different way. However, funnily enough, they don't. All 3 masks have a symbolic feature. They're generally placed on the face or even close to the face, creating small tentacles that sprout out from the edges of the mask, which then envelop the head completely. The facial features of the mask, such as the eyes, mouth, etc., align with those of the user by distorting and deforming them. The face and the head both get squeezed in the transformation, and this leads to the iconic big and bulging eyes after the transformation is complete. You get a better look at this distortion of the eye when you see the mask being taken off. It feels like there's some sort of suction going on that makes it hard to pull the mask off. Now, once the transformation is done, the character becomes Big Head. In the comics, the transformation from the user to Big Head was extremely easy. It was quiet and barely attracted the attention of the people around them. However, in the movies, animated show, or comics based on them, the transformation is a chaotic mess. The user starts spinning like a top, almost creating a tornado. There's also a cloud of black smoke surrounding them if the user is particularly evil. There's a lot of noises, including thunder and lightning, when the user is transforming. Sometimes we can even see the skeleton of the user going through some brutal changes that no chiropractor would support. Usually, as you might have guessed, these transformations take a while. But when push comes to shove and the user's in a tough situation, surprisingly enough, the transformation ends up occurring quite quickly. Once complete, the user will have this rubbery green head. Their ears are always noted to be completely covered by the material of the mask. They also have extremely shiny teeth, and their eyes are completely cartoonish to look at. Sometimes, we see the character end up with interesting new clothes, depending on the repressed personality of the user and their love interest, if they have any at the moment. While these differences are interesting and entertaining, there's no denying that these changes are rather subtle. We're sure you guys are hankering for something a bit bigger than that, and well, we hear ya. Let me tell you the biggest difference between the different versions of the mask.
Do I feel lucky? Well,
the facade the mask has. One of the things that makes the mask the most interesting artifact ever has to be the way it affects the minds and personalities of whoever's using it. The mask ends up affecting the subconscious mind of the character, which vastly changes the way the characters behave once they start using the mask. In the movie, animated series, and the comics that were based on both, we get to see a tendency of the mask that has led fans to theorize that it might have a mind of its own. It has a personality that ends up infusing with the user once they use it. Given that the mask is inherently a mystical object, it has a form of dexterity and adaptability that no other artifact has. The mask tends to mold itself according to the inner motives and intent of its user, whoever they may be, as long as the wish or intent is present in the subconscious mind. Now, these desires hidden in the subconscious are usually completely unknown by the conscious mind, and hence, the user has no idea why they're doing the things that they're doing once they use the mask. In a way, you could say that the mask facilitates a very Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of situation. The mask brings out an alter ego of its user that would be the complete opposite of the user depending on whatever things that they hide. Their ambitions, dreams, joy, whatever they keep hidden becomes the core personality traits of the alter ego the mask creates, and this alter ego starts making all the decisions with no inhibition whatsoever. Effectively, it's all gas and no brakes. This is an interesting dynamic, as when people live in a society, they're bound to be held back by psychological inhibition or societal rules. To be suddenly free of those brings out the real version of the character to the forefront. Every time a user wears the mask, the resulting big head is a bit different, as everyone has different wants. Even if the user is a bad person, the mask bestows the character with the same powers, which, as you can guess, is extremely dangerous. The users lose all sense of self-decency when they transform, so if it is a criminal who gets their hand on the mask, a barrage of dead bodies is soon to follow. Based on the emotions we see the characters showcase, it becomes evident that once the mask is being used, all the darker emotions the user has come up to the surface. Sure, Stanley Ipkiss was a good guy, but would you say that goodness increased the moment he wore the mask? Nope. But time and time again, we can see Stanley ultimately going haywire over the smallest things because once he has the mask on, he can't control his rage. It's almost like the mask feeds on those darker emotions. So, as a wearer of the mask, not only do you end up losing your sense of self, you also end up becoming a slave to your own desires that you had no idea about. The unpredictable nature of the forces that control the mask ends up making all the users extremely irrational. The inner self of the user isn't bound by anything. As long as they can imagine something, it'll end up in their hand. The user will kind of become corrupted with the mask and start going for the most chaotic routes out of a pickle because the mask amplifies the fun and games. The mask is also not unwilling to indulge in some violence. Now in the movies, we see that trait come into play when the mask is used by the mob boss. However, in the original comics, we get to see just how violent the mask can be. So in the original comics, the mask not only gives the user all the powers and transformative abilities, it also gives them incredibly high intelligence. This intelligence starts to affect their personality, and sure, the user starts making smarter decisions and making smarter choices, but the mask starts pushing the user towards insanity the longer they have it on. The mask starts twisting the perception and motivations of the characters in a way that almost changes them into becoming cruel and dangerous with extremely violent tendencies. In both the movies and the animated series, we see that the mask has a mentality of its own, and that's what starts affecting the personality of the user. But in the comics, the mask has no such personality. It simply amplifies the traits, conscious or subconscious, that the character already has. The more the user uses the mask in a playful way, the more the mask is ingrained within their psyche. Eventually, the user starts feeling highly overwhelmed by their own desires, and when they try to remove the mask, it leaves them shaken up. You see, when the user first uses the mask, they undoubtedly want to use the powers of the mask and get whatever they have always wanted. Whether it's revenge against something that happened years ago or some sort of injustice the user suffered at the time. Once that little itch is satisfied, the character starts wanting to scratch more of their itches, which inadvertently leads them to getting trapped inside their head while having no control. They have to sit in complete horror and watch as Big Head does things around them that they themselves do not condone. Take Stanley Ipkiss as an example. In the comics, he found that the mask was being sold in an antique shop. Once Stanley got the power of the mask, he claimed he would become a superhero and protect innocent people around him. Noble thought, right? However, as it turns out, the moment he put on the mask, the first thing he did was kill off the biker who tormented him the day before. And since Ipkiss got away with it because of the mask, he slowly started taking revenge on everyone who had caused him sorrow in the past, even if it meant killing them. So, slowly but surely, Ipkiss started drowning in his own selfish desires, which changed him as a person in a way. This version of the mask has a will of its own, and that will is the one that corrupts the will of the user, turning them into a violent version of themselves. In the comics, we learned that the mask was created by a tribe in Africa and had gained a personality of its own. That's why sometimes the users of the mask can talk to it, especially when the user is asleep. These dream sequences prove that the mask is actually an enabler. It's the one that pushes the user to do horrendous things, but it keeps insisting that it is nothing more than a mere mask. Even if the user is someone well adjusted on the surface, the mask would simply work with these traits, amp them up to 11 to get the desire that's hidden under the surface, and use that against the user. Once the mask manages to get into the psyche of the user would end up turning into either the anti-hero Big Head or the villain Big Head, depending on their own desires, and they'd go out on a killing spree, murdering anyone who stands in their way. When the user removes the mask, their personality is altered to a degree, as the mask actually leaves a residual effect on the characters. The users usually have no recollection of the behavior from the night before, and no matter what they've done, now they have to deal with the consequences by themselves. After wearing the mask, we see the user becoming extremely agitated and angry. This could be because the mask ends up tiring them out, and the barriers in their mind are completely shattered by the end of the night. While it might seem at first glance that the barriers that the mask managed to break down go back up, fully healed once the mask is taken off, that's not the case. Sometimes the barriers aren't healed at all, and that leads to the user eventually going completely insane over time. Although we've yet to see this happen, this speculation seems rather plausible. Because of this nature of work, the mask users eventually come to terms with the fact that they will always be distorted by the mask into someone that they're not. In the original comics, we see the Big Head name given to the mask user by the press after the user went out on a killing spree. No matter who ends up wearing the mask, the results are always the same. The mask brings ruin and chaos wherever it goes, and death and destruction befall the user and anyone around them. While the original comics showcase the mask as this extremely dark, mystical artifact, in the movie, the mask is more like a drug metaphor. The user can do whatever they want without any consequences, and even though they wake up the next morning not remembering anything, for some unknown reason, the characters want to use the mask again and again. One of the most interesting details about the mask in the movie is how the user may or may not remember all the things they did while wearing it. The first 2 times Stanley came back to his senses after using the mask, it was because he had fallen asleep with it on. When he woke up, he didn't remember much about all the things that had gone down. However, when Stanley forcibly took off the mask from his face, he seemed to remember everything that had happened. This is something that's followed throughout all the movies, which marks the movie mask as a different version of the mask altogether. Then we get the animated series mask. This mask has to be the strongest of them all because it can be used both day and night. The alter ego that this mask creates sometimes refers to himself in the third person, basically separating himself from the user completely, but this version of the mask also varies from person to person. Also, the animated series mask seems to have a better grip on the user. In one of the episodes, we see Milo, Stanley's dog, get kidnapped. Stanley wanted to go and get the dog back, but he couldn't use the mask. Why? Because he saw an advertisement for a limbo tournament at the Coco Bongo Club. He knew that if he were to wear the mask, he'd end up going to the tournament even though he wore the mask to save Milo. In the episode Sister Mask, we see Stanley trying to control the mask using the Sister Mask. However, after a while it stops working, which kind of implies that the mask is probably aware of its surroundings. This mask is a self-aware and independent version of itself. While other versions of the mask don't seem to care much about other people, this version is different. Some of the mask personas in the animated series seem to care about the user and the people around them without any questionable desires. Stanley is a lonely guy. He's hated by everyone and he's desperate to be someone else, someone who's not like him. That's why when he wears the mask, he instantly becomes someone completely opposite to himself. However, take a look at Dorian from the first film. He was never insecure about himself. He knew who he was and what he wanted. So that's why when he wears the mask, it gives him what he wanted, the ability to cause fear. The movies and the animated series mask turn the user into almost cartoon versions of themselves, allowing them to get out of troubling situations and do fun and mischievous things, unlike the masks of the original comics, which want to corrupt the user completely. No matter which version of the mask you look into, we can all agree on one thing. The mask is an untiring avenger and a force of nature. It's virtually indestructible, unstoppable, and unpredictable. Even the most trained person can't control the mask fully for their own benefit. The mask can create a better life for not just the user, but the people around them as well. However, the mask does a better job when there's corruption, destruction, death, and ruin in the picture. Users of the mask! Over the years, there have been several characters that have had the misfortune of taking the mask out for a ride. The very first character to ever wear the mask was Stanley Ipkiss. He's a neurotic and weak man who initially buys the mask for his girlfriend Kathy. However, after he wore the mask, he went on a killing spree and murdered several people who had bullied him previously. His killing spree earned him the name Big Head Killer. After taking off the mask, Stanley couldn't deal with the consequences of his actions, and it left an emotional toll on him. That led to him changing completely, becoming verbally abusive towards Kathy, and even kicking her out of their shared apartment. Eventually, Kathy ended up killing Stanley after she figured out that he was the Big Head Killer. The next person to wear the mask was Lieutenant Kellaway. After Kathy killed Stanley, she gave the mask to Kellaway for safekeeping. However, Kellaway didn't listen to these warnings and started using the mask himself. He used the powers of the mask to kill mob bosses that ruled Edge City, but the mask's effect was evident. With each wear, his methods were becoming more and more violent. Despite that, Kellaway managed to keep innocent people safe. At one point, Kellaway almost killed off his friend and partner when he was facing off against the police squadron. This made Kellaway realize how much the mask was affecting him. He faked Big Head's death and then buried the mask in his basement under a slab of cement, despite Kathy asking for it back. But the mask didn't remain hidden for long. At one point, mobsters steal the mask from Kellaway and eventually force it onto their mob driver, Nunzio. As his real self, Nunzio is a bit of a wimp. However, when wearing the mask, he became the most brutal big head we've ever seen. He went on a killing spree, murdering anyone who dared to stand in his way. He killed off all of his former colleagues and all the other mob groups that Kellaway had not killed. This forces Kathy to take some drastic measures to get the mask back from Nunzio. Effectively cosplaying a hooker, Kathy managed to woo Nunzio enough and got the mask away from him. The moment he takes the mask off, Kathy shoots him dead and takes the mask for herself. Out of the vast list of mask wearers, Nunzio is the only one who cannot be sympathized with. With the mask back in her clutches, Kathy then took on the mantle. Now, she's technically the first female incarnation and the second in general incarnation of the mask if you follow the chronology. Kathy used the powers of the mask like Kellaway did and helped everyone around her. She even fought with Walter, the big mob muscle man that even Kellaway fought at one point. When Kathy was fighting Walter, she realized that wearing the mask wasn't worth it at all, and that was when she declared that she no longer wanted to wear it. Kellaway hit Walter with his car, and the mask held in Walter's hands ended up in the ocean. After Kathy, we saw Rick take on the mantle. Rick is a teen who was a huge fan of Big Head. He's an anarchist, and he went to the docks where Big Head supposedly died. There, he ended up finding the mask under the rubble. He tried to show it to his friends, but the mask started tempting his friends to take the mask away from Rick, which resulted in Rick fully succumbing to the tendencies and desires of the mask. Rick's actions as Big Head got him a lot of attention from the police and Walter, and eventually he was taken into custody. Rick somehow managed to escape from the police, only to end up coming face to face with Walter. Rick got past Walter by unleashing a whole bunch of animals, but soon he realized he was going to lose control when he almost killed a kid who wanted his autograph. So Rick took off his mask and gave it to Ben, marking Rick as the first mask who didn't kill anyone. Ben, as a dutiful friend, took the mask from Rick and put it on, hoping to become a rock star. He even managed to get a show for himself, but as Ben sang on the stage, the mask started to take over his body, which ended up getting Ben booed off stage. Walter returns following the mask, and Ben has no other choice but to run away from the stage. He met up with Hugo and gave him the mask. In the meantime, Detective Kellaway was following Big Head, and when he almost got the teens, Hugo put on the mask and ran away. As he traveled in the darkness, he noticed that his vision was starting to get really distorted. This was affecting his sanity, and Hugo ripped off the mask the moment he reached his friend Archie's house. Archie is the fourth teen in the group. Even though Hugo warns him several times not to wear the mask, Archie puts it on and becomes a superhero in the hopes of giving Big Head his redemption arc. Archie managed to stop two mobsters from killing a lion, but ended up getting cornered by Walter. Using the lion, Archie managed to knock out Walter, and this is when Kellaway met with the teen. He tried to be empathetic and assured Archie that the mask was simply bad news. This led to Archie taking off the mask and giving it to Kellaway. However, before the detective could leave with the mask, Walter takes it from him in the hopes of wearing it. The mask, however, refused to bond with Walter, which angered the man, who promptly threw the mask in the river. After Walter throws the mask into the river, we see Ray Tuttle wearing it. He too uses his powers to keep everyone safe and punish wrongdoers. His daughter, Emily Tuttle, followed her father's footsteps and wore the mask as well. However, she wasn't an anti-hero. She was simply a menace, going around doing harmless chaos and keeping everyone safe to the best of her abilities. Emily's Big Head persona wears a witch costume, which makes her stand out. Other than these, we also see Paul Newman, Ira Staub, Snuck, Aldo Krasker, and Eric Martin wear the mask and become Big Head in the long run. But these aren't the only people who have worn it. Believe it or not, the mask has been around for a long time. So inevitably, we also got several crossover mask stories. In 1996, we had Grifter / The Mask, where Grifter was supposed to break up a weapon smuggling operation taking place at a gun show in Las Vegas. An anti-gun demonstrator came across the mask, became Big Head, and went to the gun show, wreaking havoc everywhere. In classic comic book crossover fashion, Grifter originally thought that Big Head was the bad guy, but once that misunderstanding cleared up, they joined hands together and stopped the smuggling ring. This is the only crossover that has some connection to the main storyline. A year later, the mask returned in Lobo vs. the Mask. Here, we see Lobo fight with the new Big Head. Eventually, they join forces in the hopes of finding the Ultimate Bastiche. The Ultimate Bastiche is also a previous mask wearer who had destroyed several planets. That's why the Ultimate Bastiche has a huge bounty on their head. Eventually, Lobo and Big Head stop at a truck stop, and Lobo manages to get his hands on the mask. He excitedly wears the mask and starts causing mayhem everywhere. Eventually, however, he's sucked into a black hole and goes back in time. Upon returning to the past, Lobo realized that the Ultimate Bastiche was none other than himself. He was stuck in a time loop. Realizing that, Lobo gave the mask to the mask wearer from whom he had originally won the mask. He turned into his past self and cashed in on that bounty, bringing a good ending to the story. Then, in 1998, we have Martial Law vs. the Mask. Here, the story is simple. We have Martial Law who wants to retire, but some scientists put on the green mask of this serial killer known as the Sleep Man, which turned out to be the worst idea ever. Martial Law had to put his coat back on in order to fight against this almost immune superhuman serial killer with a knack for extreme violence and reality warping. In the end, the Sleep Man ends up taking off the mask as he gets completely overwhelmed by its power. However, much to everyone's surprise, Martial Law wore the mask next, hoping to express his true self. The Joker also at one point ended up wearing the mask. In Joker / The Mask, he found the mask in the Museum of Gotham City. He wore it and became the new Big Head. However, unlike the others, he didn't get any innermost desire coming to the surface, probably because the Joker never hid his desires in the first place. So, he kept his personality and mentality while also gaining the powers of the mask that turned him completely invulnerable. Thanks to the mask, he became utterly unstoppable and restarted his criminal career. He almost managed to kill Batman and take over Gotham. However, Commissioner Gordon decided to ring up Lieutenant Kellaway from Edge City to help with this new Joker. Despite all of that, Harley Quinn and the Joker work together to take over Gotham, and they end up airing his own super violent TV shows. Lieutenant Kellaway couldn't do anything to help out with the situation, but luckily, Batman eventually recovers from his injuries and manages to have a chat with the Joker. He told Joker that he wasn't funny and that it was very evident the Joker was using the same material over and over again. This led to Big Head Joker bashing down on Batman. As he continued the beating, suddenly the real Joker popped up on his shoulder and declared the Big Head Joker really wasn't funny. The real Joker managed to gain control over the body and took off the mask, returning to his normal self. With that, Big Head Joker's rampage came to an end, saving Gotham from further carnage. Powers of the Mask. No matter which interpretation of the mask you look at, each version allows the user to have the powers of cartoons effectively. It's also known as the Toon Force of cartoon physics. Toon Force is an inherently imaginary power that can be used to perform comedic and funny things, including saving people if it's done in a funny way. This power is inconsistent at best. The characters in question can do all sorts of weird things as long as it's funny. On wearing the mask, the user can easily pull out a bazooka or a grenade launcher from a pocket, or simply eat a bomb, have it explode in their tummy, and be alright. The mask is a source of unlimited power, and the user can control all that power by simply wishing for whatever they want. The mask is a powerful artifact, and it can do a lot more than simply summon things out of thin air. It can also change the body shape and size of a person. It also allows the user to turn into someone else or something else. The mask also allows you to travel in whichever way you want, effectively bending the rules of time and space. While the user can bring things from their imagination into the real world, they cannot change real-world artifacts into something else. The mask also gives the users immunity against anything and everything that they might have to take a hit from. However, in the original comics, we see the users actually bleed like normal people, even though they can't feel the pain. Here, the mask also gives the user superhuman intelligence, a healing factor, and other physical attributes, as well as the ability to deform reality. In the animated series, the mask can only make the user invincible as long as they don't catch a cold. Now, given that the user is invincible, the mask actually starts treating everyone around the user as invincible too, especially by clearing out the inhibition and morality from the user. The mask almost forces the user to treat everyone the same way, which ends up killing people. If we had to make a cumulative list of all the things the mask could do, it would be reality warping, increased stamina, durability, strength, and speed, along with regenerative abilities. Mask users may also get the ability to mutate and experience an increase in intelligence along with amplification of any powers the user might have originally. They can also manipulate energy if there's any need. While all of this makes the mask sound absolutely robust and foolproof, the reality is a bit different. The mask too, like everything else in this world, has weaknesses. Weaknesses of the mask to keep in mind. The mask does have several weaknesses. However, the main one is that the mask can be taken off by someone else, some environmental factor, and sometimes literally by itself. Whenever the mask leaves the user returns to their normal self, which leads to them losing all of their powers, benefits, and abilities thanks to the mask. This can be extremely dangerous and almost fatal, depending on the circumstances. Another big weakness of the mask has to do with the fact that, even to this day, we don't know what the limits of it are. The mask's powers vary depending on the user, and since the mask has a personality of its own, it's difficult for any user to willingly or unwillingly push the limits, leaving us in the dark. With each user, the mask shows different sides of itself, and with each iteration of the mask, we get a different power set. For example, the mask in the animated series shows us that if there's some dimensional warping happen, the mask user can be caught in a different dimension, and the powers of the mask won't do anything to save them until the mask is brought back to its own dimension. We also saw that if the user has a cold, then the powers of the mask will stop working. If the user wore the mask despite the flu, then they would suffer 7 terrible symptoms and be killed. The only way the user can save themselves is by injecting these exceptional termites that are only found in Bavaria into their mouths, which would heal them in seconds. If the user is unwilling to try this, then they would have to abstain from using the mask for as long as they're sick. In the film, we see that the mask is completely useless when it's outside during the day. In fact, the mask would come off on its own at the first ray of the sun. This is because in the movie, the mask is related to Loki, who is a Nordic night god. His powers are at their peak during the night, and that's why the mask is only active during the night. However, in The Son of the Mask, Loki uses his powers in broad daylight, so maybe Loki intentionally gave his creation a weakness, but then again, in the same movie, we see Otis wearing the mask out in the daylight while he's trying to kill Alfie, so no one knows why that weakness was put in the first place. Coming back to the original comics, the mask didn't distort the user's memories, so the users in the comics always remembered what had gone down the night before, and this would affect the entire psyche of the user, slowly driving them insane. At first, the user would think everything they remembered was just a dream, but when someone else commented on these actions, the memories would come rushing back, overwhelming the user. Marvelous verdict! Over the years, The Mask has brought us a lot of joy and horror with its creative problems and unique solutions. While most of us are extremely familiar with the comedic side of The Mask because of Jim Carrey and the animated series, we believe the original comics of The Mask deserve just as much love, if not more so. The way the creators have portrayed the descent into psychosis for every character is truly astounding. Paired with the harrowing imagery, the original Mask comics are a treat to read, but only if you're not averse to graphic and eerie imagery. Personally, I enjoyed the original comics quite a bit. Kathy's big head is my second favorite, following Stanley's, but what about you? Who's your favorite version of Big Head? Let us know in the comments and we'll see you guys around. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.